Chapter 12. Julie hadn't managed to sleep much of that night. The store was too attractive of a target, too indefensible against anyone looking to risk it all for supplies. She knew they were beyond lucky to stumble into this space first, and it meant all the wares on the shelves were up for grabs. But it wasn't a great place to actually get some rest and energize herself for the journey ahead. Every time one of the kids moved or she heard a sound come from the street, Julie would jerk awake, regardless of how close to a deep sleep she might have been. And with the distant sounds of explosions and gunfire spreading across the city, there was always something to react to. Whenever there was a lull in the cacophonous noise, Julie would start to drift off, believing it might be over. But then it would start up again, and Julie would jerk up, grabbing her rifle and pointing it at the door, pausing to gauge the situation before realizing the danger was still out there. Far off in the night somewhere.
"Are you okay?"
Mari's voice asked from beside her, as Julie set down her weapon after a fresh series of explosions. "Yeah, I'm all right, sweetie," she said, reaching over to brush a few locks of dark hair out of the child's face. "Are you?" She paused before answering, as if considering the question. "What's wrong?" Julie asked.
"I don't want you to worry about me,"
she admitted with a shrug.
"But I'm scared."
Julie exhaled and reached over to beckon the child closer. She scooched up to Julie and settled against her side. Julie then draped a protective arm over Mari and pulled her in close. "I know you are," she said. "And I'm sure your brothers and sisters are scared too."
"Are you scared, Julie?"
she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Julie considered the question for a moment and thought about lying to the girl. She knew they needed her to be a pillar of strength in these dark times, and wondered if perhaps the best way to do that was to present an unshakable facade. But then she started to weigh the moral ramifications of lying to them, and her choice was clear. "Yeah," Julie said, squeezing the young girl against her side. "I am, but I'm putting on a brave face and trying to get through this with all of you. It's all right to be scared. It's natural. And if someone in a situation like this says they aren't scared, then they're lying. You know, bravery isn't about never being scared."
"It isn't?"
Mari asked, looking up at her with wide eyes. "Nope," Julie said with a gentle shake of her head. "Because we all get scared. Every single person in this world gets scared. So, being brave is when you're scared but you push through anyway. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's conquering it."
"I've never heard that before,"
Mari said, contemplating Julie's words silently as she snuggled in against her foster mother. "That's a Julie original for you," Julie said, trying to keep a warmth to her voice that helped show her she was being brave by conquering her own fears. That would hopefully give Mari the strength she needed to conquer hers. It wasn't long before Mari was fast asleep once more, along with her twin brother and all of her foster siblings. Steve and Ellen had fallen quiet as well, and Julie was hoping Ellen had managed to get some sleep. The horrific pain she was still experiencing wasn't going to get easier tonight. They'd given her some Advil PM they found on the store shelves, and it seemed to help a little bit. But this was an injury that was going to require a lot more than an over-the-counter pain med to alleviate. The next morning, Julie felt completely haggard and more exhausted than she'd been when she'd first sat down. The kids, however, seemed to have slept through the night for the most part. Julie envied them for that. They were going to be waking up soon, and they'd want to know what their next move was. Julie had absolutely no idea what she was going to do after the hellacious bombing that took place through the night. It had finally tapered off sometime in the early hours of the morning, and it had been quite a while since a new boom had rocked their temporary shelter. She hoped that meant the attack was over, at least for now. But with the explosions stopping, It wouldn't be too long before people started to pour back out into the streets. And when they did, a fully intact and open convenience store was going to be an attractive locale. That meant they needed to get moving, fast.
"Where are you all headed?"
Steve asked Julie after the kids had woken up and were starting to refill their bags with food and supplies from the store's shelves. "I need to get these kids somewhere safe," Julie said, looking back over at the 5 of them as they excitedly compared what they had pulled off the shelves.
"They seem pretty safe with you,"
Steve said, gesturing to Julie. "Maybe for the short term," she replied with a shrug. "But eventually we're gonna run out of luck. Eventually these explosions are gonna stop. And we're either gonna be in a safe place when the gangs and criminals start crawling out of the woodwork, or we're all gonna be dead." Steve nodded slowly.
"Well,"
he said, looking hesitantly out through the broken door.
"Ellen and I heard from some folks yesterday that a military camp is being set up not too far from here, and they're taking in refugees. They got fences and weapons, but they're still building it. So I don't know how safe it is right now."
Julie's face lit up at this news. It was the answer to her plight, a destination to shoot for. This was the journey's end she'd sought. At every bombed-out and abandoned police station. If the military were here, if they were truly setting up bases and protecting refugees, then perhaps this long nightmare might finally be over. "It's a chance," she said, blinking back tears as a tidal wave of relief flooded through her, filling her with adrenaline and reinvigorating her drive. "It's a chance, which is more than we had just a few minutes ago." Steve smiled at her.
"I'd offer to accompany you, but with Ellen's leg the way it is, I think it might be best if we lay low somewhere around here for a while," he said. "At least until she's well enough to travel."
Julie chewed on her bottom lip, thinking about what he was saying. She wanted so badly to sweep that idea aside, to offer to see them safely through the dangerous streets, on their way to the safety of the military camp. But then she looked back at the 5 kids under her care. If they were going to survive the trip, they'd need to move quickly and get to safety before the streets became a war zone. To try to travel with Ellen in that condition would be to move at a snail's pace, taking frequent breaks. It would be dangerous for the kids, and for both Steve and Ellen. Julie quickly realized Steve's plan was the best option for everyone. "Just try to stay up high," she insisted. "Don't go out into the streets if you can avoid it. Barricade yourselves into an empty apartment or something that's not as easily accessible from the ground level. Take as many supplies from this store as you can. Enough to last weeks, if not months. You can do this. You're strong, good people. You can survive it."
"Thank you,"
Steve said, reaching out and patting Julie on the shoulder.
"Seriously, thank you for everything. You saved our lives. You gave us a chance. I can't even begin to express my gratitude. Ellen's as well."
"Julie," Ellen called out, drawing her attention down to the floor where the woman was lying. She was reaching her hand up toward her savior, beckoning her over. Julie walked over and crouched beside the woman, grabbing her outstretched hand and holding it close to her heart. "You all right?" Julie asked her with a kind and patient smile.
Thanks to you, yes,
Ellen responded with a slight wince.
the pain is pretty intense, but with time I know I'll get through it. I gave birth to 3 boys, all over 8 pounds. I can take some pain.
Julie laughed, giving the older woman's hand a reassuring squeeze.
But I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you,
she said, tears streaming down her cheeks.
Thank you so much. You're a blessing.
I was just in the right place at the right time with the right kids, Julie said. Looking back over at Hector and reflecting on his heroic and generous actions.
That boy is going to go on to do great things,
Ellen said, following Julie's stare and nodding in Hector's direction.
Compassion is an important quality to have in one so young. His compassion is going to make him a gift to the world. You've done a wonderful job with him. You're a great mom.
Oh, Julie said, blushing with a shrug. He isn't my son. They're all foster kids. I've had Hector living with me for about 4 years now.
I didn't say you gave birth to him,
Ellen said with a weary chuckle.
I said you were a good mom. There's a lot more that goes into motherhood than giving birth. You're a role model for the boy, for all of them. You influence their moral compass and show them the way. And you seem ready to protect them no matter the cost. If that's not being a mother, then I don't know what is.
Julie felt tears in her eyes as she looked back over at the kids, tossing bags of chips and boxes of cookies to one another. A mother, she repeated. It was what she'd always wanted to be, though she always felt odd when she failed to put the word foster in front of it, even in her mind. She turned back to Ellen and smiled. I think that's the single nicest compliment I've ever received.
Now, get those kids to safety,
Ellen said, letting go of Julie's hand and wincing in pain as she adjusted herself on the floor.
We'll be fine.
I will, Julie said. Promise. And once we're at the camp, I'll tell the soldiers you two are here somewhere. I'll have them come out and look for you if I have to lead the search party myself.
Thank you,
Ellen said.
Yes, thank you, Julie,
Steve said, coming to stand over them.
Just be safe.
We all will be, she said, standing up and turning back to the kids. I'll make sure of it. Chapter 13. How much longer? Ramon asked wearily, 4 hours into their journey through the empty, decimated streets. Not much, Julie replied, scanning the surrounding area back and forth as she waited for the first sign of trouble.
That's what you said an hour ago,
Ramon complained, and she could hear him warily dragging his feet along the pavement as she tried to navigate their way to the location Steve had specified. Stop complaining, Stacy chided. We're gonna get there. Julie nodded as Ramon fell silent, then clutched her rifle as she heard something move around the corner of the building they were passing. She stopped immediately, shouldering the weapon and preparing to face down any threat that might crawl out of the woodwork. However, she exhaled a deep sigh when a tabby cat sauntered its way out of the alley and stopped to look at them. It sat on its haunches and started to lick its paws as though it had not a single care in the world. Geez, it's just a cat, Hector said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. Yeah, Julie replied with a nod, lowering her weapon.
Aw, can we keep him?
Mari asked, starting to make little clicks with her tongue as if trying to coax the feline toward them. No, Julie said simply, looking back at Mari, who pouted at her in response. That cat is way better off on its own. Besides, you never know if it's carrying some kind of disease. Mari seemed to shudder at the thought, and eventually the cat continued on its way. Over the last hour, Julie noticed that people seemed to be poking their heads out of cover and making their way back into the world again. Once more, she managed to keep the odd, curious party at a distance with a sour glare and a flash of her weapon, but she wondered how long that would last. Eventually, someone would grow bold, and their thick backpacks were going to be far too enticing. She hoped they'd reach their destination soon, and when they arrived, they'd find the military camp intact. So much could have happened in the time since Steve had heard about the camp's creation. The city had fallen under attack several times, meaning the military might have abandoned the location or been driven off. She needed the camp to still be manned, still be standing. If it weren't, she didn't know what she would do next. The only other option would be to escape the city, Make for the suburbs or the Hollywood Hills. But that was a much longer journey, and the streets would be teeming with dangers she knew she'd never be able to stand up to alone. Julie gave an imperceptible shake of her head. She couldn't focus on that now. She needed to remain in the here and now. Focusing on the past or the future would only serve to distract her. All that mattered was what was directly in front of her. There was no use dwelling on the unknown. She'd meet the next challenge when it presented itself. For now, she just needed to scan the area and ensure her kids were still breathing.
Freeze!
A voice rang out. Julie stopped dead in her tracks, turning at the sound of this new voice. The kids cried out in terror and huddled behind her as every muscle in Julie's body tensed for a fight.
Drop the weapon, right now!
A commanding voice boomed out across the street. Julie fixed the oncoming stranger in her sights and saw that he wasn't alone. There were 10 people, men and women, all wearing beige combat gear and carrying hush-powered rifles. The weapons were drawn and pointed threateningly at her. Soldiers. Julie practically gasped in relief, wanting to throw down her gun and run to them, begging for their help, utterly desperate to share the responsibility of protecting these kids with another capable, trained adult. But she didn't. Not yet. "Who are you?" Julie called out. Just because they were wearing soldiers' uniforms didn't mean they were soldiers.
"We're soldiers of the U.S. Army who just gave you an order,"
the lead soldier barked. He had been the one who had commanded they freeze just moments ago.
"This city is under martial law, which means when I say freeze, you freeze. When I say drop your weapon, you drop your fucking weapon before you get dropped. Understood?"
Julie recognized the tone. She'd heard it every day from commanding officers as she fought for democracy in faraway lands. The soldiers advanced on her in formation, spreading out like a well-oiled machine to surround them and cut off escape routes. She didn't need to see official identification. These folks were the real deal. Julie lowered her weapon, placing it on the ground before standing at attention and shooting off a crisp salute. "Sir," she said to the commanding officer, holding the salute with years of practice pose and precision behind her. The soldiers seemed to relax just a fraction, but their weapons were still trained on Julie and the kids. But she didn't feel threatened by it. The good guys were here now.
"That's a good-looking salute there, civilian," the commanding officer said. "At ease."
Julie instantly broke the salute, widening her stance and placing her hands behind her back at a parade rest.
"You serve?"
"Yes, sir," Julie said back, loudly and clearly, the way she'd been taught so long ago. "U.S. Army retired. 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan."
"What are you doing out here, soldier?"
he asked her, looking up from his weapon. "Seeking you out, sir," she said, gesturing slightly with her head at the children behind her. "These are my foster children. Our home was invaded by looters. I dispatched them, and we set out to find help. I heard there might be a military refugee camp being established in this sector, and we were set out to find it." The commanding officer inspected her, stepping closer to look her up and down. He seemed satisfied with her answer. He looked back at the kids, no doubt gauging their reactions. If they were in danger with her or somehow being held against their will, they'd be able to communicate that to the soldiers easily at this point.
"Well, you heard right,"
the soldier said, lowering his weapon and approaching her. He held out his right hand, and Julie reached out to shake it. He gripped her hard, and she returned the intensity of his greeting with a tight, efficient squeeze. He seemed to like that.
"We're still working on establishing a perimeter, but we're bringing in refugees from around the area. You can follow us, and we'll be happy to get you set up. However, we're going to insist that we hold on to your weapon in the meantime."
Julie paused. She didn't like the idea of being out on the streets without a weapon, but she wouldn't be leaving the kids unprotected. These were her brothers and sisters. They'd be able to take over protecting her little family. The idea of surrendering that responsibility churned her stomach with anxiety. But Julie knew the officer hadn't been making a request. "Of course, sir," she said, stepping back from the weapon.
Julie, are these the good guys?
Ramon asked her, reaching out to clutch at her arm. Julie nodded sharply as one of the soldiers came forward and collected her rifle. "They are," she said. "They sure are." Chapter 14. The camp spanned an entire small park a few blocks away. Julie breathed a sigh of relief when they approached. Fencing was being established, but it wasn't done yet. There were sentries positioned everywhere and makeshift guard towers around the perimeter. It reminded Julie of various bases she'd served on throughout her military career, and the familiarity of it brought a sense of calm reassurance to her. Large tents were set up along the ration stations, and a few dozen civilians could be seen weaving around the camp, a look of calm relief and hope on their faces that Julie was starting to feel blossom within her heart. For the first moment since that initial explosion had rocked her home, Julie was starting to relax, starting to think that maybe there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Sure, the power was still out, and the city was under attack, but they were now in the safest possible place they could be. "Wow," Hector said, as they were led through the camp by an armed escort. "Yeah," Julie said with a proud nod. "This reminds me of my time in the army. We're in good hands here."
Julie, did you kill people in the army?
Ramon asked, and the question took Julie completely by surprise. "What?" she asked, turning back to look at him to see if maybe he would just let the topic go. She realized Ramon hadn't seen the body she'd left in her wake within the house before they had left, and she hadn't needed to fight in front of the kids on their journey thus far. She supposed, after a moment of reflection, that it wasn't a totally inappropriate question given the events of the last few days. "Only when I had to," Julie said. "Only to protect innocent people." She watched as Ramon and the rest of the kids turned that information over in their heads. Then she watched as each of them, one at a time, slowly nodded in understanding. They'd seen so much in such a short time. Their home, their place of safety and security, had become a war zone overnight. The world they'd come to rely on had completely fallen away from them, taking every comfort and convenience away. That meant their worldview was going to change as they adapted to this new reality. Even if the world somehow returned to the way things had been, this experience would change them forever. There was no going back. Ellen's words reverberated through her mind as she considered this. She needed to show them the way, guide them with a strong moral compass, and ensure this world didn't twist and beat the compassion out of them. These kids had already been through so much. They'd lost their parents and struggled to find meaning in a world that no longer existed. They needed someone to look up to. They needed a role model. Julie just hoped she was it. "You need to be able to protect yourselves and the people you care about," Julie said to them. "But that doesn't mean picking fights or taking from others. It means strengthening yourself mentally and physically, and knowing right from wrong."
How do you know right from wrong?
Mari asked, and Julie again had to pause to consider the question. "Well, it's a feeling you get," she said. "It comes from your moral center. You think about the ramifications actions have, the people being hurt. You ask yourself if what you're doing is helping someone or if it's hurting anyone. Then you make a judgment call based on what you find."
Sounds like a rough decision,
Louisa said.
I mean, what if you think what you're doing is the right thing, but later you found out it was wrong?
"It's possible," Julie said. "And when that happens, you can't fall apart. You learn from your mistakes. You grow as a person. You promise yourself that you'll never make that mistake again, and you let experience be your teacher."
Sounds complicated,
Stacy said.
I don't ever want to be a soldier.
I do, Hector said, proudly thumping his fist against his chest. You do? Julie asked him with a raised eyebrow. Yeah, he admitted, scratching the back of his neck.
Since when?
Louisa asked.
Since today, he said defensively. Since I saw everything Julie did to protect us. Since I saw these people trying to save the city. They're heroes. You're a hero, Julie.
Julie found herself blushing. She'd called Hector a hero just yesterday, and she'd meant it. Now he was returning her compliment, and she had to admit, it felt nice. I think you'll make a great soldier, Julie said to him, reaching over to tousle his hair.
We're always looking for recruits,
a now familiar voice said from Julie's left. She looked over to see the commanding officer who had found them in the street, approaching to walk beside her. Sir, Julie said. She was no longer a soldier. She no longer existed in the military chain of command. She didn't have to show this man such deference. But just because she was no longer officially on duty didn't remove the years of training and the respect she held for every man and woman who swore the oath of service.
Glad to see they found a place for you,
he said with a nod. His face remained stern, and he walked with impeccable posture, arms clasped behind his back. Yeah, Julie responded. I was impressed with how quickly they were able to get us processed and assigned to lodging with no tech.
Ugh,
he said, waving his hand in front of his face.
Those systems take up too much time and taxpayer money. Give me a good old piece of paper and a pen any day of the week.
There's wisdom to that, Julie said with a smile.
But I meant what I said before,
he continued. Sir? She asked, not following his train of thought.
We're looking for more recruits to join up, he said.
Julie shot a look back at Hector, who suddenly didn't look as gung-ho about enlisting. With all due respect, sir, Julie said, keeping decorum over the protective worry of a mother welling up in her heart. The boy is only 14.
I wasn't talking about the boy,
he said. And both Julie and Hector let out a collective breath.
I was talking about you.
Me? Julie blinked in surprise.
Absolutely,
he said, his voice brightening.
You clearly still know your way around a weapon, and you were able to bring these kids a long way all by yourself. You can take the soldier out of the army, but you can't take the army out of the soldier.
He was laying it on thick now, and Julie wondered if this man had ever served as a recruiter. His tone felt like one from those speeches soldiers gave to high school kids while standing outside their cafeteria in an attempt to get them to enlist. But he was playing on her history, her patriotism, on the respect she still held for the uniform and the job. That's a flattering offer, sir, Julie said, looking back at the kids, who all had their eyes trained on her. But these kids are my responsibility now. Protecting them needs to come first for me. Always.
They're protected now,
the officer said, gesturing at the 5 children with pride.
They're under the protection of the most powerful military on Earth. We've got your back, sister. All we're asking is that you have ours.
That's... Julie said, her voice starting to trail off. Something to think about. She wasn't sure why the officer's reassurance didn't put her mind at ease. Surely there were dozens of highly trained U.S. soldiers around them now, protecting them with powerful weapons. But the idea of taking on additional responsibilities away from her family was troubling to Julie. What if she re-enlisted, and the army needed her in another section of the city, far away from these kids who looked up to her for hope and protection? What if she died somewhere in the street while trying to protect others from the criminals and terrorists trying to carve this city up like a cake? Who would be there for her kids then? Who would give them the kind of personal attention they needed? Sure, the military could physically protect them, but she once more thought back to Ellen's powerful words. They needed her with them to preserve their moral compass, to instill in them the values they'd need to succeed in life.
"Please think about it,"
the officer said, as the soldiers in front of them came to a halt in front of the large tent.
"I'll be in touch."
"Thank you, sir," Julie said with a nod, watching as the officer marched off. She turned back to the soldiers who had been accompanying them. One of them gestured to the tent.
"This is your lodging for the time being," he said. "At the moment, it's just your family here, but be advised, if there's a need, we might have to start doubling up."
"Of course," Julie said. "Thank you so much for everything."
"Just doing our jobs, ma'am,"
the soldier replied. They turned to walk away, leaving Julie and her family to look at their new home. "Well, it's not much, but it's better than nothing," Julie said, looking forward to taking her backpack off and finally getting some rest. "It's like camping," Ramon offered, and Julie smiled at his optimism. Things finally felt like they were going to be all right. "Right," said Julie with a smile, reaching over to lay a hand on the boy's head. "Just like one big family camping trip." The moment the final word left her mouth, the entire camp was rocked by a huge explosion that shook the ground. A burst of flame erupted from the center of the camp, and Julie could feel its heat against her skin. The kids screamed and flocked to her. Julie instinctively reached to her back for her rifle, but the soldiers had confiscated it, citing a regulation against civilians carrying firearms within the camp. That meant she was completely defenseless as another explosion boomed into existence. The camp was instantly filled with screams of terror and shock. Julie looked around in horror as her dreams of a peaceful future and an end to this struggle came to an end. "Get down!" she yelled to the kids, rushing into them and pushing them to the ground as a group. The sound of bullets whizzing around them filled the air, and the screams of her foster children echoed through Julie's ears. "Is everyone all right?" she cried out to them over the sound of battle. She grabbed at each of them, inspecting them for wounds. Thankfully and miraculously, they all seemed to be physically all right. "What's going on?" Hector screamed, tears falling down his face. "Is it the terrorists?" Julie wasn't certain. These explosions lacked the power of those that rocked many large buildings throughout the city, but someone was attacking the military camp, and the danger level had hit its zenith. "Follow me and stay low," she instructed, meeting the eyes of each of her foster children. She saw in those innocent stares looks of horror, terror, and deep, dark despair. It shattered her soul to pieces, knowing just how close they'd been to safety. It was such a cruel twist of the universe that they had brushed up against relief, only to have it violently taken away once more by the horrors of this new, hellish world. Julie watched as soldiers fell around her. They dropped in place amidst a storm of bullets that tore through their body armor and left them quivering in masses of blood and meat on the ground. These people were supposed to protect her, supposed to protect her kids. They were a symbol of hope, heroes who would give them their happily ever after. And now, they were dead and dying. Many continued to fight bravely, standing their ground and firing into the smoke and flames at unseen enemies. But it seemed as though they were outmanned and outgunned. It would only be a matter of time before they fell completely, and this camp was wiped out entirely. But who was doing this, and why? Julie didn't have to wait too long for an answer to her question.
"These streets belong to the Hellspawn,"
a voice called out, and Julie could suddenly see men in hoodies and gas masks rushing in with high-powered rifles, lobbing grenades and firing at anything that moved. The Hellspawn? The street gang? They were at war against the U.S. Army? That seemed absurd to Julie at first. It would have been laughable just a few short days ago to imagine a group of street thugs being able to stand and fight against the men and women of the U.S. Army. But here they were, cutting through soldiers like wheat in the fields, using high-powered weapons that were never meant for civilian hands. "Come on, we have to move," Julie called out to the kids, keeping low as they dashed through the war zone. Julie stopped near the bleeding body of a fallen soldier, stooping to collect his rifle and say a brief prayer for such a senseless loss of life. She checked the weapon's ammo and was relieved to find it mostly full. This poor soul was gunned down before he had much of a chance to fight back. Julie took some ammo from the soldier's belt and motioned for the kids to follow her. "Hey, freeze, bitch!" someone yelled off to her right. Without even thinking, Julie whirled in the direction of the voice, crouched low, and fired. Her rifle roared to life, bullets shredding through the body of a hellspawn soldier who was leveling a far more advanced rifle in her direction. "What the fuck?" someone said from behind her. Julie turned again, ducking down as this new opponent opened fire on her. She unloaded death with the pull of a trigger, firing a steady line up the gunman's body.
"Oh my God!"
Hector cried out, watching their bodies fall. "Keep moving!" Julie shouted over the sounds of explosions and gunfire. They darted between the tents and made their way to a half-finished fence. There, Julie saw Hellspawn members pouring in through a huge gap in the construction. She was amazed by the sheer number of them. They were an army in their own right, and they were making a definitive move to become an occupying force. "Stop here," Julie instructed to the kids, all of whom were staying low and clutching at one another in terror. "No matter what you do, do not move until I tell you to, all right?" she said, looking at each of her kids until they acknowledged her order with a nod. The incoming wave of gang members seemed to have stopped, leaving only a few between the family and their freedom. "All right, I'll be back," she said, before popping up and running into the fray. She opened fire as she moved, mowing down 6 Hellspawn sentries who had blockaded the gap in the fence, ensuring no one moved in or out without their say-so. 4 others who had remained in the area turned at the noise, watching their brothers fall. She couldn't see their faces, but she hoped they were shocked. She hoped they were experiencing horrific grief. It was what they deserved after killing so many soldiers. She opened fire, dropping one of them. The others turned their weapons on her, and Julie dove for cover behind some ammunition crates. "She's trapped," one of them yelled, and she could hear them advancing. She wasn't the one trapped. She was setting a trap, and they were walking right into it. She likely thought they'd just sit there, terrified, waiting for them to find her and gun her down. They thought they had strength in numbers, but they were wrong. Julie popped up, gauging their location by the sound of their respective approaches. She managed to take 2 of them by surprise before the last one managed to get off a shot. She ducked again just in time, with not a microsecond to spare. She was actually able to feel the wind displacement of the bullets passing right over top of her head as she moved. The Hellspawn gang members were rattled now and kept firing at the space where she'd been. Julie crawled on her forearms through the grass and dirt, coming to the sides of the crates that shielded her. She popped out on the ground on her side, lining the last gang member up in her sights. She pulled the trigger with a snarl and watched with a sense of satisfaction as the man dropped to the ground. Julie scrambled to her feet, looking back at where she had left the kids. "All right, now," she called over to them, and watched with anxious dread as they moved from their hiding place to join her. She wasn't going to waste any time. She motioned for them to follow as they headed toward the fence gap together as a family. They passed through the makeshift exit back into the city streets, which did nothing to calm Julie's nerve. "Hey, stop!" someone called out from her left. Julie turned to see a Hellspawn member rushing at them. She turned and fired, dropping him into the pavement in a spray of blood. Some of the kids screamed as she pulled the trigger, but Julie couldn't tell which ones. It didn't matter right now. They needed a place to regroup, A place where they could catch their breath in relative safety and figure out what their next move would be. Across the street, she noticed an opening that led down into the Los Angeles subway system. That would do just fine. "Let's go," she ordered, looking back at the kids. "Into the subway." The 6 of them ran across the street without another word, coming to the mouth of the subway entrance and descending the stairs quickly before more members of the Hellspawn arrived. As they reached the bottom step, Julie looked ahead into complete darkness. The only light was behind them, the sunlight shining into the space through the opening they had just entered. In front of them was a dark void of potential dangers. Julie knelt in front of the turnstiles, laying down her gun and pulling off her backpack. She opened it and rifled around inside until her hand closed on one of the many roadside flares she'd packed for just such an occurrence. She pulled the flare out and lit it in her hand, casting a red glow over the subterranean space. "Come on," she said, motioning for the kids to follow.
"In there?"
Mari asked, dread and horror weighing down her words. "Yeah," Julie said. "It'll be safer in there."
"But it's dark,"
Mari objected. "I know, sweetie," Julie said. "But we've got this light, and I will be right there with you the whole time, all right?"
"Do you promise?"
Mari asked hesitantly. Julie knew how much her foster daughter feared the dark. It was a deep-rooted fear that had persisted throughout the years. And this was absolute darkness beyond anything she could have experienced in her bedroom at night. "I do," Julie said, reaching her hand out to her. Mari stepped up and took Julie by the hand, squeezing tightly. She looked over at the other 4 kids, and they all seemed hesitant but unwilling to protest. "Just stay together. We are going to get through this." One by one, the family moved over the dead subway turnstiles, lit by the crimson glow of Julie's flare. She wanted to get just a little farther onto the platform, so they'd be far enough away to avoid the prying eyes of anyone looking down the stairs into the tunnel.
"Hey, Julie,"
Ramon said, drawing her attention.
"You were a real badass up there."
Julie blushed. "Language, sweetie." She kindly corrected him. "But thank you."
"Seriously, though,"
Hector said.
"those guys were all like, 'Stop!' and you were all like, 'Make me! Blam, blam, blam!'"
"Yes, something like that, I guess," Julie said with a shake of her head.
"All those soldiers died,"
Stacy added, her voice sounding small and distant. Julie knew that tone well. She was in a state of shock. She stopped walking and turned to look at the teen girl in the eyes. "Yeah, they did," Julie said. "And it was a horrible tragedy."
"Why?"
Stacy asked simply, her eyes welling up with tears as a solemn silence fell over the family.
"Why did those men... Why did they do this?"
Julie shook her head. That was a question she just didn't have an answer for. "I don't know," she said simply. "And I think it's a good thing that we don't know, because we're not the kind of people who could ever do something like that." Stacy nodded, seemingly accepting that answer. "Hey, what's that?" Louisa asked, pointing farther down the platform at the borders of the light given off by their flare. Julie turned to see a boot lying there on its side. A very, very large boot. She paused, wary of their surroundings now. Had there been other people in this tunnel? Was there some unseen danger lurking in the shadows? She took a step forward, extending the flare's circle of light. The boot connected to a leg, which connected to a massive torso and arms that looked like they could bench press a truck. There was blood around the body. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to draw a gasp from the kids. Finally, Julie illuminated the figure's face. It was a strong, handsome face with long black hair and a chiseled jawline. His eyes were closed, but his massive chest was rising and falling. There was something familiar about that face, but Julie couldn't place it right away.
"Oh my God!"
Ramon called out, rushing to her side.
"That's Brock Gage, the Allfather."
Chapter 15. Hours earlier. Brock didn't have to walk with Sally and his Mafia thugs for too long. The journey only lasted a few blocks before they came to what appeared to be a small Italian butcher shop. "Here we are," Sally said, pointing at the front of the run-down-looking establishment with pride. Brock pointed at the door and raised an eyebrow. "This is where he wants to meet?" Brock asked, for the first time starting to question whether this invitation was legitimate. Sally and his men laughed again, a sound that Brock was getting really tired of really fast. "What, was you expecting some big, swanky building?" Sally asked, gesturing toward the door. "You think we got an office downtown with a huge golden sign? Our operation has always needed to fly under the radar." Brock shrugged. There was some wisdom to that. It wasn't anything he'd ever truly considered. He never intended to become involved in the world of organized crime, and even the allure of Mafia movies never really interested him. "This way, Your Highness," Sally said, opening the door and gesturing inside. Brock paused for a moment, suddenly very aware of the 5 armed men behind him. Were they actually taking him in there to meet with the big boss of bosses? The man who practically ran the LA criminal underworld? Or were they just taking him off the street to stick a gun in his mouth and fire? Brock quickly realized that if they wanted to kill him, there would be no need for such theatrics. It wasn't like they had to worry about the police or any modern societal structures while the city was falling apart. No, this invitation was likely very real. But that still left one question hanging over Brock's head. What on earth could Giovanni Nunzino want with him? He was an actor. His usefulness ended the moment every digital movie projector and television had fried in the EMP attack. So why the theatrics? Why send these goons to pick him up off the street? What did this man need from him so badly? Whatever it was, Brock had a sinking suspicion he wasn't going to like it. The only thing Brock wanted was to get out of town, and he didn't need anyone's help to do it. He also doubted that Nunzino was reaching out to him just because he wanted to help Brock escape the wrath of the Hellspawn. But standing out here, contemplating the motives of the most notorious crime boss in the city, wasn't going to do anyone any good. Brock had no choice but to continue inside and find out firsthand what was going on. He walked in through the open door and was instantly greeted with the smell of rotting meat. He practically gagged as he moved within the humid interior and noticed the room was filled with flies buzzing about. "Don't mind the smell," Sally said. "We're working on it. It's a butcher shop with no power. All the meat went bad." "Maybe you should throw it out," Brock said, burying his nose in his forearm. "We've been a little busy," Sally said with a shrug. "The big man is going to tell you all about it." He gestured with his gun to the back of the shop, behind the counter, through a doorway covered by strips of hanging plastic. Brock walked out around the display counter, grimacing at various cuts of meat practically crawling with maggots. He fought the urge to vomit up his morning rations as he pushed through the plastic strips. The back room was a sterile white space filled with hanging sides of rotting meat hung on hooks. The smell back here was even more repulsive, and had Brock not been followed so closely by Sally, he might have stumbled back into the front of the store. In the center of the room was a large stainless steel table, on top of which sat various knives and saws intended for cutting meat. Brock had a sinking suspicion that table had been the site of more than just cow and pig dismemberments in the past. At the far end of the room, there was a large door flanked by 2 armed men holding automatic rifles. "Through there," Sally said, pointing at the door. Brock rolled his eyes at all the cloak and dagger. They were drawing this process out, trying to either impress or intimidate him. He certainly wasn't impressed, though he'd be lying if he said he wasn't at least a little intimidated. Walking into a situation like this, severely overpowered and outgunned, wasn't something the old man would have approved of. But again, he realized that if he wanted him dead, there had already been ample opportunity to kill him. Sally and his men could have gunned him down in the park, beside the burning body of his father. They certainly didn't need to march him all the way here. Brock approached the 2 guards, who each took a step toward one another, barring his path. Brock sighed and looked back at Sally.
"Are you kidding me here?"
he asked, gesturing to the 2 large bald men wearing dark suits and sunglasses inside. "A security precaution," Sally said with a shrug. "You can't be too careful in our line of work." Sally looked past Brock at the 2 guards. "I got Brock Gage here to see the boss." One of the men slung his rifle over his shoulder and approached Brock, staring him up and down.
"Put your arms out,"
he said simply. "What?" Brock asked, and the other sentry leveled his gun at Brock's head.
"Put your arms out,"
he repeated, with a sense of finality. He wasn't going to ask again. Brock raised his arms parallel to the ground and stood there patiently while the sentries started to pat him down. He ran his hands along Brock's torso and up and down both the outside and inside of his legs, checking for weapons. Finally, the man stood up and turned to the other sentry, who had yet to lower his weapon.
"He's clean,"
the guard said. His partner slowly lowered the rifle and took a step off to the side. The one who had patted him down reached down and rapped on the door twice with his knuckles. Brock heard the sounds of several locks sliding out of place until finally the door swung in, and another suited bald man in glasses appeared there.
"Brock Gage for the boss,"
the sentry who had searched him said. The door slammed shut again as Brock waited impatiently. After just a few seconds, it opened again. The same suited man appeared and nodded to the sentries. They stepped aside, and the new man looked Brock up and down.
"He's expecting you,"
he said, beckoning Brock inside with one hand. Brock stepped forward and walked inside, following the man into a moderately sized office, lavishly decorated and lit by a series of kerosene lanterns. There was framed artwork all over the wall, a lush area rug covering the tile floor, and a huge ornate desk on the far side of the room. Behind the desk was a tall-backed chair, turned to face the wall. Brock nearly laughed at the absurdity of the moment. He wondered whether Nunzino had hurriedly turned around to face the wall once the door had closed in order to make a grand appearance. A plume of smoke rose up from the arm of the chair, and Brock followed it down to see a hand adored in jeweled rings with a cigar clutching between 2 fingers. The hand lifted up, vanishing behind the back of the chair. A larger puff of smoke rose up from behind the desk until finally the seat started to rotate. Brock crossed his arms over his chest as Nunzino slowly, deliberately, rotated his seat of power to bring himself into view. Brock first noticed he had an overly tanned face and beady eyes sunken beneath a prominent brow. Smoke still leaked between his thin lips and wafted up around a very large, bulbous nose. His hair was elegantly and expertly coiffed. It was pure black, except for splotches of silver on the sides that rose up toward the back of his head like the wings of an eagle. His face broke into a smile at the sight of Brock.
"Brock fucking Gage," he said,
pulling his cigar back into his mouth and taking a puff. He stood up behind the desk and gestured to the big man as though he were admiring a work of art.
"I'm a big fan. How the fuck are you?"
Brock nearly laughed at the question. How was anyone doing in this nightmare the world had plunged itself into? How was he even supposed to answer that?
"Want to tell me why I'm here, Mr. Nunzino?"
he asked, keeping his face as hard and as unreadable as stone. If Nunzino were taken aback by Brock's blunt question, it never registered on his face. His smile only grew as he sauntered out from behind his desk, walking around it to stand directly in front of Brock. He was of average height, barely coming up to Brock's broad chest. Brock looked down at the mafioso with disdain and distrust, but despite their difference in height, Nunzino seemed to fill the room with his presence. There was some intangible factor that surrounded him, making his every move appear grand and powerful. It was impressive, and it was easy for Brock to see how he commanded such respect and loyalty from his men. Nunzino laughed, pointing at Brock with both his index finger and pinky. "See?" he said, looking around at his men. Brock realized Sally had walked into the room behind him and was now standing between him and the door.
"That's what I love about this guy in the movies. He's no nonsense. He's a tough badass. He comes in here and starts fucking shit up without so much as a how you doing."
"This isn't a movie," Brock said, keeping his arms folded. He was trying to use his size and presence to intimidate the mob boss, establishing some dominance in the conversation. Unfortunately, that wasn't working. Every glare and blunt statement tossed out by Brock seemed to ineffectually bounce off of this man.
"Oh, I know, believe me,"
Nunzino said, gesturing toward himself by pressing his fingertips into his chest dramatically.
"And if it were, it'd be a horror flick. That shit going on out there, Madone, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy."
"That's why I'm trying to leave this city," Brock said, gesturing toward the door.
"I was on my way out before your men here picked me up." Right, you're right,"
Nunzino said, sounding apologetic. He seemed to move his hands with every word as he spoke, using them to accentuate his statements and make every point somehow grander.
"And I'm sorry for that. I'm also sorry about your old man. From everything I heard about him, he was a real tough son of a bitch." "You don't know anything about my father," Brock growled.
He didn't like how this man was trying to play on his emotions and manipulate him. It was all so irritatingly transparent. "Actually, I do," Nunzino said. And Brock took a sharp intake of breath at the revelation. Nunzino noticed this and gave Brock a questioning look. Then his lips parted into a white, toothy smile. He barked a short laugh.
"Not like that. Nah, he didn't work for me or nothing. I never met the guy. But I told you I'm a big fan of yours. And when I'm a fan of someone, I do a little digging into them. I've read all about your family. I know all about your old man's military record. The farm you paid off for him. Your mother's death when you was just a baby. I know it all."
"If that's supposed to flatter me, it doesn't," Brock said, his voice tight. He tried not to show the relief he was feeling. "What do you want?"
"You're right. I've been taking up a lot of your time today, and for that I apologize," Nunzino said. "But I don't know if you understand the danger you're in right now."
"What are you talking about?" Brock asked.
"Are you threatening me?"
Nunzino laughed again.
"Oh, no. I don't threaten people,"
Nunzino said.
"It's a waste of time. I'm way more result-driven. When I have a problem, I solve it. And when my friends have problems, I solve those too."
"Are you saying I have a dangerous problem?" Brock asked, raising an eyebrow.
"I am,"
Nunzino replied, leaning back and sitting on the edge of his desk.
"You see, there was a time when criminals in this city had rules. We had a code. Sure, we murdered and cheated to get to the top, but there was a civility to it. Then, all of a sudden, along came these fucking street gangs, these motherless pricks. And these guys, they don't got none of the decorum or respect we was taught to show when coming up the ranks."
"You're talking about Tyrus?" Brock asked, trying to get the end of this story as fast as possible.
"Exactly,"
Nunzino said, spitting on the floor in disgust.
"That fucking prick. My organization has been running this territory for decades, and now this fucking guy comes up and thinks he's gonna take it all. The whole fucking city."
He starts stockpiling big-time weapons, military-grade shit. Then he starts moving into my territory. Now, the world goes to hell and this prick is trying to take advantage of it. He's trying to make his move while our city is getting blown up by terrorists. Can you believe it?
Well, I've seen it firsthand, Brock said.
So yeah, I can believe it. Exactly, Nunzino said, pointing at Brock. You've seen it. That prick took your old man from you. Killed a good man, a fucking patriot. And now he's got his sights on you in a big bad way, my friend.
I can take care of myself,
Brock said. Can you? Nunzino questioned, standing up straight again. I don't know any man who can stand alone against what these guys are packing. That's why you need friends. Powerful friends.
And you want to be my friend? Brock asked. Is that it?
Nunzino smiled, snapping his fingers and pointing at Brock's sternum. You're catching on, he said. You're a lot smarter than the usual riffraff I have to deal with around here. Exactly. I think I can do a lot for you. I can give you the backup you need, give you the weapons you need. I can keep you alive while that Tyrus is out there hunting for you like a prize deer.
Uh-huh,
Brock said, still not allowing himself to believe for a second that this man was willing to do something so purely selfless.
And you'd help me get out of the city. No questions asked.
What questions could there be? He asked with a shrug. You gotta get out of here, out to that farm of yours. I'm sure it's safer there. Your old man was no slouch. It's probably got booby traps and walls and everything you need to keep Tyrus off your back forever.
And you just help me do that for nothing?
Brock asked, tired of beating around the bush. He wanted to know what this man wanted, and he wanted to know it now. Hey, I told you, I want to be your friend, Brock, Nunzino said, raising his hand and patting Brock on the tricep fearlessly. And friends, they help each other.
Help each other, Brock said,
repeating the mob boss's words back to him.
You mean you help me, and I help you?
Exactly, Nunzino said. But with me getting you out of this city for good, the orders of things is a little mixed up here. See, you help me first, and then I help you get out of here.
I don't want anything to do with you or your organization, Brock said. I don't know what you could possibly need from me. You've got more than enough muscle. I'm sure you've got guys even bigger than me. You don't need money, so what could I possibly do for you?
An endorsement, Nunzino said, cutting to the chase. You see, Brock, you're a powerful man. And I'm not talking about physically, though you got plenty of muscles, don't get me wrong. But I'm not interested in that. You're a celebrity, an action icon. Your name represents strength. It represents power. And if the people were to know you were working with me, that you supported my organization, it might do a lot to sway some hearts and minds. It might inspire people to believe in my power, in my strength. It might weaken Tyrus and his holds on the streets. You get me?
So you want me to what? Brock asked,
scoffing and looking around the room.
To go out there and start telling random people on the street that I support you? Like it's some kind of presidential election?
Nah, of course not, Nunzino said. What I want you to do is to go out there with some of my men and lock down some areas of interest. Ruffle a few feathers. Bust a few heads. You take out some of Tyrus's men, maybe some police and soldiers, and you let the people know where your loyalty lies. They see the Allfather standing with Giovanni Nunzino, and suddenly our position becomes a lot stronger.
So you're telling me to go kill cops? Brock scoffed. To kill soldiers?
Only if that's what the situation calls for, Nunzino said. They haven't let go of the way things used to be yet. They're still trying to keep society going. They haven't realized how things have changed, but you're not a stupid man, Brock Gage. I know you understand there ain't no going back. Things have changed forever. And we can't just make the same mistakes over again, trusting in these pigs and their laws. Nah. A new order has to be established. And it can't be Tyrus and the Hellspawn. You know what a disaster that would be. It needs to be a real leader. Someone who people can respect. Someone who will protect them and give them what they need. Safety. Peace.
And you think you're that guy?
Brock said, uncrossing his arms for a brief moment to gesture at Nunzino. No, Brock, he said, his face suddenly becoming very serious. I know I'm that fucking guy. And everyone in this city knows it. Tyrus knows it too. That's why he's so hell-bent on stopping us from expanding. That's why I need you. I need the All-Father. We have a common enemy, and if we work together, we can take him out, and these streets will be ours.
I'm not interested in ruling the streets, Brock reminded him.
I'm only interested in getting out of here. Right, Nunzino said. Sorry. I get carried away sometimes. I just see the big picture stuff. Of course, if you want to get out of here, I'll help you get out of here. But first, we're gonna work to rid the city of that piece of shit that killed your old man. Brock paused for a moment. He imagined standing over Tyrus as he bled out into the street. He imagined holding a gun in his scarred face, watching the inevitable horror seep into his eyes, and then pulling the trigger again and again and again until there was nothing left of him. He'd imagined that many times since the moment his father had fallen. When he imagined it, he was filled with a sense of feral joy. But Brock wasn't about to seek revenge. He had risked too much already. What good would it do to hunt down Tyrus? If he needed him dead, he could have finished the job after carving up his face. Revenge was a hollow concept, one that did nothing for anyone. If he killed Tyrus, what would that accomplish? A momentary feeling of satisfaction? It wouldn't allow his father to rest easier. It wouldn't honor the old man's memory. What would honor him would be to follow through on his wish, to return to the farm and establish a thriving community there, to take care of people who called that place home and help them brave this new world. That was Brock's purpose, and he wasn't going to delay those goals to help a mob boss seize power.
I don't care about revenge,
he said finally, and Nunzino's brow furrowed in confusion.
Tyrus can do whatever he wants. I don't give a damn. The only thing I care about is getting out of this city and getting back to my family's farm.
Well, you're never gonna make it out of here alone, Nunzino said. Not with that prick and all the pricks who follow him coming after you.
My father taught me to survive, Mr. Nunzino, Brock said. He taught me to avoid detection and fight my way out of any jam. I don't want your help. I don't need it, and I'm certainly not any friend of yours.
I'd think very hard about this, Nunzino said. Standing as tall as he could and pointing up in Brock's face without a shred of fear, I would take a second to think very long and very hard about your future and what it's going to look like.
I don't need to think about it, Brock said. I'm not going to go out there and kill for you, to tell people I work for you. I'd never soil my name like that. You're not better than Tyrus, and I'm not going to help you gain even an inch of territory. I'm leaving this city, alone, and you all can kill each other for all I care.
There were flames in Nunzino's eyes. His nostrils flared with the strain of his rage, and Brock thought for a moment he could actually see the mob boss shaking. He certainly wasn't used to being spoken to in such a way. Brock took some satisfaction in that. Finally, Nunzino let out a long breath that pushed out through his thin lips. Fine, he said, his upper lip curling. Have it your way. Nunzino snapped his fingers, and instantly Brock felt something thin and sharp close around his neck. The mystery object tightened, closing off his airway completely. He realized it was a piano wire or something very similar. They were trying to choke him to death. Brock could feel the person behind him holding the wire was much shorter than both himself and Nunzino. It had to be Sally, the only one close enough to him at the time to launch this sneak attack. Brock jerked back, easily overpowering Sally and slamming the fat little man back hard into the wall. The wire around his neck instantly grew slack, and Brock slammed his elbow into Sally's side as hard as he could to make him let go. Now able to breathe once more, Brock noticed the sentry in the room turning at him with his gun drawn. Brock grabbed the gun before it could turn fully to him and jerked it up. The guard panicked and pulled the trigger, spraying bullets into the ceiling and shattering the dead light fixtures. As glass started to rain down on them, Brock saw Nunzino starting to draw a gold-plated handgun from his jacket. He grabbed the sentry and pulled him between himself and the mob boss as Nunzino opened fire. 4 shots smashed into the body of the guard, and as he went limp, Brock pried the rifle from his hands before letting him fall. Brock used the captured weapon to open fire on Nunzino, who was already in motion, diving behind his desk as a spray of bullets slammed into the thick wood and the wall behind it. The door to the office flew open, but Brock was ready. He met both guards who had barred his entry earlier with shots from the rifle before shouldering past their crumpled bodies into the room with the hanging sides of meat. A loud bang from behind him coincided with a blinding pain that slammed into his broad back, just below the right shoulder. He pitched forward, nearly falling, as another series of bangs resounded. He felt a powerful impact in his low back, just to the left of his spine. Nunzino had popped back up and shot him twice. Brock had no idea how bad it was, but the pain was worse than anything he'd experienced. Brock dove at the stainless steel table in the middle of the room, landing on top of it and using his momentum to tip it over onto its side. Nunzino's shots rang out as they slammed into the steel table. And Brock had a brief second to compose himself. The various knives and saws on the table clattered to the floor beside him, and the door to the store started to open. When it fully swung open, Brock could see the 5 men who had accompanied Sally to bring him to this place. "What the?" one of them started to say. "Fucking kill that prick!" Nunzino yelled from the other side of the room. But before they could open fire, Brock was pulling the trigger. His shots tore through 3 of them before a clicking noise let him know he was out of ammo. He threw his gun aside and grabbed a large butcher's knife and bone saw from the floor. As the remaining 2 tried to make it through the doorway over the bodies of their fallen friends, Brock slammed into them, driving the knife into the chest of one while swiping the bone saw out with his other arm, slashing into the throat of the remaining assailant. A spray of hot blood splashed across Brock's face as he jumped up onto the butcher's counter, rolling along it until he fell to the floor. Gunshots rang out from the room behind him as Nunzino gave chase. Landing on the floor, Brock felt the twin gunshot wounds in his back throb with stabbing pain. Scanning the room, he could see his travel pack lying on the floor. Within were his weapons, armor, and rations. Thanking whatever otherworldly force was looking out for him, Brock crawled across the floor and grabbed the strap of his bag. Just then, the door to the shop opened, and 10 armed men in tracksuits were standing there, looking down at him. "Shit," Brock spat. "Get him, you fucking morons!" Nunzino screamed from the next room. Before they could react, Brock rose and charged at them like an expert football player, slamming into them with his bulk and sending them flying back. He stumbled out into the street, landing on the pavement and rolling back to his feet, leaving a streak of blood in his wake. Gritting his teeth through the pain, Brock slung the bag onto his back and ran. There was no time to stop and pull out a weapon of his own. Shots were already ringing out as he started to weave around the parked cars. He ran into the alley, certain the Mafia soldiers were giving chase. The pain was overwhelming in his back, and he could barely see as his vision was starting to fade in and out. As he made it through the alleyway, he practically collapsed against a disabled taxi, struggling to catch his breath.
What the fuck?
Someone yelled just behind the cab. Looking up, Brock saw 15 armed men wearing baggy hoodies, emblazoned with the logo of the Hellspawn. They looked as though they were en route to somewhere important, but the huge, wounded man bursting out into the street stopped them dead in their tracks.
Shit, it's the Allfather,
one of them yelled. As one, they drew their weapons and opened fire. Brock dove back into the alley, back toward the Mafia enforcers chasing him.
There he is!
He heard one of the mafiosos scream from the other side of the alley.
Yo, what the fuck?
One of the Hellspawn yelled behind him. He was now effectively trapped between two warring factions.
Yo, it's those Guinea motherfuckers.
Shit, Hellspawn, one of the Mafia men yelled out. And immediately the two sides opened fire on one another. Brock dove between a metal dumpster and a huge air conditioning unit in the alley, cursing his luck. Whichever of the two sides managed to emerge victorious in this firefight would surely claim him as their reward. As he turned over onto his side, he noticed that right beneath him was an uneven metal structure. He quickly realized it was a barred manhole cover. Brock gasped in surprise and scooted off of it. If he could just lift it, he might be able to escape into the sewer. He crouched beside the circular entryway in the ground, sliding his fingers between the bars. Brock put all of his strength into his arms and legs, pulling with everything he had. The manhole cover weighed nearly 300 pounds, and Brock Gage had 2 bullet wounds in his back. Lifting it was a monumental undertaking. He strained and screamed over the sound of bullets flying overhead, and finally, the cover began to move. With bulging biceps and burning legs, Brock shifted the manhole cover aside. He set it down with a sigh of relief before taking off his pack and dropping it into the darkness. He followed an instant later, climbing down the ladder rungs implanted into the side of the vertical tunnel. He tried to reach up and pull the cover back into place. It moved after a brief moment of struggle, sliding back into the circular recess. But as it fell into place, Brock suddenly lost his grip on the ladder and fell down the tunnel into the darkness. He landed with a wet splat at the bottom. Minimal sunlight pouring down through the bars in the cover, just enough so that he could vaguely make out where his pack had fallen. He tested his arms and legs and found nothing was broken, but his back was still in outrageous pain. His body wanted to stop, rest, shut down, and heal. But Brock couldn't stop now, not with the legacy of his father on the line. He rifled around within his bag and managed to pull out a flare. He lit it, bathing the tunnel in its ruby glow. It was a cramped circular pipe, with filthy drain water running along the bottom of it. Brock had no idea where it led, but he knew he had to pick a direction and head in it. He dragged the bag along behind him, no longer having the strength to lift it up on his back. It sloshed through the water as he stumbled along the never-ending winding tunnels of the sewer. Eventually, he emerged into a much larger central chamber that seemed to serve as a wastewater center. He thought about stopping here and resting, but he still wasn't willing to take a chance. Brock pushed his way through service doors and tunnels, navigating through the underground as best he could, practically blind beyond the glow of his flare. Eventually, the tunnels and service doors he went through at random deposited him into the city's subway system. Brock traveled along the tracks for as long as he could before coming up to a large central platform. He climbed up onto it with considerable effort, the entire chamber spinning as he pulled himself up and over. He stood once more and took a few steps before dizziness and pain overtook him. He pitched forward onto the platform, dropping both his pack and the flare in the process. Darkness overtook him, and Brock fell into unconsciousness. He was stirred back to the waking world by the sound of voices approaching. He groaned in pain, trying and failing to move. He felt warmth pass onto his flesh, like the kind of heat generated by one of his flares.
"Oh my God!"
He heard a voice call out, just before he fell unconscious once more.
"That's Brock Gage, the Allfather.